Anyway, good morning, everybody. Everybody stay dry.
Yeah.
Oh, did you see the Maui pictures? Maui was just got inundated, huh? I mean, just drenched.
Oh, I do.
Yeah. On Oahu, did we get? I mean, there's some areas, but not like what I.
Older?
Oh my God. Oh my God. And did you hear what she said?
Yeah.
So you heard she's. No, they bought it. They just bought it. So she said she made some kind of a comment about, yeah, we have concerns or something. I'm like, oh God, I hope the realtor is clean on that one.
Oh, man, that was so scary.
Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah. And how did that rock come down? They said it hopped over a car.
Oh, I saw the TikTok video. Is that the one, the Pololo?
Yeah. Over a car, through the wall.
Did you see the video?
Into the house.
Did you see the video inside the house?
I thought the
No, we saw it on TV.
Oh, but they showed it with the going in?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. No, because
This
there's
one,
a,
right?
yes, there's a house. So there's a house above, house below, and then it came from the mountain down, I think to an opening. That's what, yeah. And then the neighbor said it, or the owner said it hopped over the car, went through the wall. I don't know, because the car was gone. Through the wall into the house.
In her car. And then went through.
The guy
Oh
was
yeah,
so
it did. In
close.
your car too.
He was
That's right.
walking towards the area that the thing just went.
The lady,
Oh, was it a lake?
the lady.
Yeah.
One step. She would have.
And that thing came through fast, yeah.
I wouldn't have believed it if I didn't see it. I would
Yeah.
have been like.
On the way, she said it bounced in house, but the floor was broken here and here. But it's 5.5.
So what did they, when did they buy it?
I don't know, but it
didn't
sounded
say.
like it was just in the last couple of weeks.
They just finished renovating it, I think, and moved it.
Oh, renovating it. Oh, okay. Oh, maybe moved in then. Okay.
What section you guys on?
Oh, we started K1.
How did the realtor read it?
No, I'm,
Well,
yeah, I don't know.
that's-
Just the comment made me kind of cringe because you just never know.
Yeah.
Look, can I sue you for any reason? I can. It doesn't matter if you're right or wrong, or if I'm right or wrong. Just the fact that somebody feels that they were mistreated. Right? Somebody feels that they're mistreated, then goes to the board. Then you get sucked in.
What she could even say.
Oh,
Can I add to that part too? By the way, my name is Tony Pace. I got younger and handsomer. Don't tell him I said that. But speaking about getting sued and what have you, that's also why we preach too. Whenever there's three things. You guys know who Chemo Stone is, right? He teaches for us every now and again. The real estate attorney. He's really good and scary, but really good, right? He says the three things that real estate agents need to keep in mind, and you'll have a very long career if you do, is warn, educate, and wait for instruction. Warn, educate, wait for instruction. Oftentimes, real estate agents either talk too much, they tell their clients what to do, they give too much direction. You should do this, or you really should invest in that, or whatever the thing is. You warn, you educate, you wait for instruction. And more importantly, the last thing that you do to kind of button that up is get it in writing. So as you're having a dialogue with someone, let's say that you're meeting with your buyer and you go through J1, the home inspection. And of course, 100% of the time, right, Ken, there's going to be things on J1 that come up 100% of the time, even if the property was built a week ago. And you go over everything. The buyer says, yeah, it's good. Let's go ahead and move forward. And they're telling you verbally, just send them an email. For our conversation, we had a J1 today. We went through this, that, and the other thing. Here's a copy of your J1 report. Just want to confirm you've instructed me to satisfy and waive the J1 contingency, and we'll go ahead and move forward. So it's in writing. They don't have to sign anything. They don't have to email you back, but that conversation, that email dialogue can save you your license. So that's a PSA. I'm done. Good night, everybody.
No, super valuable. And I think a lot of times we get so busy with, in the transaction or just with other things outside of work as well, that, you have great conversations with your client. You definitely are on the same page. You skip that step.
Mhm.
Later on, like they're your best friend when things are going well. and they can be your worst enemy when things go bad.
You know why? Just so you know, clients are not your friends. And even if they're your friends before the transaction, be a professional and compartmentalize that they are not my friend for the next 30 to 45 days. They are my client and I owe them fiduciary responsibility. And I will not skip steps that I'm supposed to have. Because here's what happens, and to his point, they're going to sue you because if they go and seek legal counsel, you know what that attorney is going to say? Oh, I need to see all the correspondence and the contracts. What did your agent tell you about this? That's the first thing the attorney is going to say. So now all of a sudden you're kind of in a different category. And if this issue is tens of thousands of dollars, trust me, that friendship is not going to survive that. I promise you that.
Anyway, don't want to belabor the point, but you guys all get it, right? Okay. All right, Sunshine, why don't you start with K1?
Alright, section K, staking survey. K1, staking boundary points. Within blank days after the acceptance date, seller shall, at seller's sole cost and expense, have a land surveyor licensed in the state of Hawaii, stake the property and ensure that all boundary points are visible. Buyer may have a land surveyor licensed in the state of Hawaii verify the accuracy of the location of the boundary points prior to closing. Seller shall reimburse buyer for the cost of this verification at closing only if the location of the original stakes proved to be inaccurate. Buyer understands that staking is not the same type of survey as described in paragraph K2. It does not confirm the accuracy of the description of the land area of the property or the existence of absence of encroachments onto the property or onto a neighboring property. A survey map and report will not be provided.
Any questions on that before we make comments? So that's rarely ever selected. I mean,
Unless you're in like Big Island or something.
yeah, I've seen it here. We had a Makaha vacant land
Yeah.
and everything else was
Yeah.
kind of vacant. And so I think they had already a site map.
Mhm.
So all they wanted to do was identify the 4 points. So with a staking, right, they're gonna identify the points. They're not gonna identify the lines within the points. So I think they already had a plan of the development. It's back in Makaha where it's all vacant land and people started building. You could buy the land and then build your own home on it. So they just wanted to know roughly, not roughly, they wanted to know where the points were. So they said, we'll buy the property, but we do want a staking. Right? So it says here, it's different from K2. So keep that in mind. So when you buy, you don't ever want to ask for staking unless it's that real unique situation where staking might be good enough.
Can
But
I
I'd
borrow
say
a pen?
most of the time it would
Someone
not
have a
be.
pen that I can use. I gotta make notes second.
What if you want to do a survey though, even if it is of.
Yeah,
parcel of
yeah,
land? I mean,
yeah.
you wouldn't want just to.
Yeah, I would default always to survey.
Survey.
Because if you're protecting the buyer's best interests, like why go cheap on that
Mhm.
process?
Yeah.
It's a negotiation. So the other side could say no. Or the other side, and I'll give some points after someone reads the survey portion, but they could come back and say, just accept the survey that we did 10 years ago. And there's some pros and cons to that too,
Yeah.
right?
So on that one, we weren't buyer, we're seller. So buyer was saying, okay, at least stake it. Then I said, okay, we'll stake because it's cheaper. Yeah. Hey, Karen, why don't you read K2?
Okay, K2. Survey within blank days after acceptance date, seller shall at seller's full cost and expense have a land surveyor licensed in the state of Hawaii, A, survey the property even if the boundary points are visible, and B, if improvements exist along the property line, provide buyer with a map with surveyor stamp and a company report to show the parameters of the property and the location of any improvements in the vicinity of the perimeter property lines. The survey and map may not address whether improvements on the property are in compliance with state and or county requirements, subdivision covenants, conditions and restrictions, and or condominium property regime requirements.
Okay, there's a lot going on in that paragraph. Yeah. So first thing is, how it differs, right? It's gonna identify not only the point, the 4 points, but also how that property line runs. I've seen where you would assume by looking at the markings that it's from point A to point B straight across, only to find out when you look at the map, it's like this. And you never know that. It was done like this, I think, because in a R5, everything has to be 5,000 roughly, right? So they did that to accommodate size of lots. Right, so that's one thing. What else you want to add to that?
Another thing to consider, and there's different components to where this would fall on the contract, but if you're buying into a property that is in a flood area and you need an elevation certificate, you're going to want to know that the surveyor is the one who can get you an updated elevation certificate or an elevation cert. The reason why that's important to know is because oftentimes people will order the survey and then they realize halfway through the transaction, because the lender goes, we need an updated elevation certificate. And then you go back and go, we need an elevation. And now you find out that that's an $800 cost. That could have been a $200 cost if you ordered it from along with the survey at the same time, because it's that surveyor that's going to go out. So otherwise you'd have to go back out twice. So that's kind of a little hack to know. Again, that only applies if the property is located in the flood zone. The other part too, I still see this because Hawaii, generally speaking, is still a seller's market. It was a heavy seller's market. Now I would say it's a balanced, getting to be a more balanced market. Months of inventory, depending on the area and community, is probably anywhere from 2 to 4 months. That's still in the seller's market arena. We're not like the mainland. The mainland falls heavy and it suddenly goes from like 2 months of inventory suddenly to 10 months of inventory. We're not like that because we have a lack of overall inventory.
So balance is about 6, right?
Yeah.
That's balanced.
Yeah.
Okay.
So because we're approaching that, and you can feel it because 2 years ago, if you went in and you said buyer would like $5,000 worth of credits toward closing costs, I mean, literally they'd be like, okay, next, please. Then there's like 17 other people in line waiting to see the property and make offers, right? Now I see contracts that come in $20,000 of credit, longer escrow, like, so it's starting to favor the buyer in terms of negotiation. So I say that to say that when you negotiate, sometimes a seller, to save costs, because a cost of a survey can be anywhere from $800 to $1,200 to sometimes $1,300, depending on who available. There's an absolute lack of surveyors. Now they're getting a little bit busier because businesses come down, but it would take, the lead time to get a survey was a while. A seller would oftentimes say, I would like you to accept my existing survey. And if you don't know what you're doing or what that means as a buyer's agent, you're like, okay, sounds great. You're going to accept my offer and all I have to do is accept the survey. Fantastic. And then you get this document that looks pretty official because it is literally a survey, but let's say it's 10 years old. Agents could look at it and go, yeah, I mean, looks pretty good. Fair buyer, it's a survey. The issue that you have to bear in mind too is that survey is a snapshot in time. So if it's 10 years old, it's telling you information from when the surveyor went out there 10 years ago. The issue is we have no idea if there's any walls, fences, improvements that have been erected or destroyed since that time. We don't know if there's been a claim for new easements. Those things matter, right? So is that the end of the world? Absolutely not. But as an agent and as a professional and having fiduciary responsibility, it's your job to ask questions. So I understand that you want me to accept the new survey. When we were out there last, that wall or that fence in the back looks pretty new. When was that installed? Like, you got to be a detective because it's 10 years old, but that thing looks pretty new. That looks at least a couple years already. That should be like a red flag because now you're accepting something for an improvement that was installed after the likely date of the survey. And if all things check out and you're moving forward to accepting that existing survey, there's language that I've already built into zip forms in order to accept it, but to preserve the rights of the buyer. So I'll give you, for instance, it says something to the effect of seller shall deliver the existing survey dated whatever it is within 3 days of acceptance. The buyer shall have 10 days to review this survey and accept it or cancel based on O2. Likewise, the seller must update the SRPS to state if there's been any improvements, erections, destruction of fences, blah, 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 since the date of the survey. The reason why I do that is that actually is worse for the seller, just so you know, because we give contrary advice in real estate, right? We're like attorneys. So on the buy side, that's worse for the seller because now I'm having them memorialize that on the SRPDS, which is by statute, and it carries with it a two-year statute of limitations. So if they lie on that or don't disclose something after we've asked them to do that and they've agreed to do that, they're in big trouble. On the sell side, don't do that. Don't do that. So if you have me on the other side, you know, and you're the buy side, the sell side, don't do that. Come talk to your big, I'll help you navigate through that, but that's what the negotiation is, right? So my 2 cents on the survey part of it, survey is really, really important because you can walk in inadvertently to something. And if the subject property is being encroached on, that's a little better. That is a little better. Your position is a little bit better, but you want to know, is there an encroachment agreement already established? Because they might walk in and go, they're encroaching on me. But if they sign an encroachment agreement, that follows the land, not the owner. But what's worse is, and Dan has a story about that too, but what's worse is if the subject property is encroaching, that's a major problem. Because you walk in and suddenly if they're 6 feet onto someone else's property, that porch or that roof line or that fence in the back might have to be taken down almost immediately. Like they're walking into a lawsuit. So it's survey, you shouldn't look past the survey too quickly. Make sure you kind of stop and pause for that.
The survey really is there to make sure buyer understands what they're buying. Right, because we're on my property lines and it says identify any improvements. Is a tree an improvement?
I was gonna tell a funny story about that. I had a property a really long time ago that had a fence that was palm trees.
Okay.
The whole fence was palm trees.
Okay,
And so they were right in the middle of the line.
Okay.
So I went to Tony and I was like, what would I do? And he said to make a palm tree agreement. He drafted
That's a good one.
this whole Palm tree agreement,
that's a good one.
and it got added to the prelim.
Like a wall, like a wall agreement.
And then 2 years later, he was representing the buyer on the next door neighbor. And he was like, what type of idiot would make a
Tony said that?
his favorite? He was my seller. And then you.
Hey, that's a good one, because I've never heard of an exception to that.
And they both agreed, like, okay, if the frond falls on
Yeah.
my side,
Yeah.
whose responsibility is it?
Did somebody claim ownership of the palm trees?
The neighbor.
So they had to maintain
So
it,
was
water it and all
Tony's,
that.
So that's why he was mad, because he's like, shit, now these are my palm trees.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's why I tell you,
exactly.
good realtors, just like good attorneys, they can't do business with themselves. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's actually smart.
Yeah.
So
Like-
remember, I
like you
think
would.
we were talking the last time, I had mentioned that walls, when you get into escrow, you ask the agent, the seller's agent, identify who owns the walls. Because the surveyor will identify where the walls are, but they will not tell you who owns them, because they have no clue. Just because a wall is on the subject property doesn't mean that the owner of that subject property owns the wall. It could have been the neighbor that erected that wall. Back in the day, no surveys, right? Or very not the technology you have today back then, right? So it could have been off. The other thing is, a surveyors will identify improvements if they can see it. So I've seen where sidewalks get buried by dirt. They are not gonna dig to look for the sidewalk. So if you're kind of tricky and you say, oh, that looks like it might be going under the neighbors, like a concrete pad or something of that sort. Tell your a seller, cover it up. They would never know. They're not gonna go and dig.
You know, another tricky one too is when the encroachment is on city or county. That happens.
We talked about that.
You did,
too,
you,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Where it's, you get some kind, not an agreement,
But
just
for very rarely,
acknowledgement, right?
but they don't, the
They're not
problem
gonna
is,
agree, that's why.
they usually don't agree and in there it says we can take it back at any time. And then oftentimes what ends up happening is you request that agreement. They're like, oh, thank you for being honest and letting us know. No, now you got to take it down. So now you kind of made it known. And now you're a little bit of a target to,
So
Yes.
would you not do that? Would you just say,
So
it's tough.
So I would say that if you're
Warn,
the,
educate, wait for instruction.
yeah, if you're the listing agent, I would tell the buyer's agent, you know, we can ask, but they're not gonna approve anything. So why even bother with that? Because the risk, Right, sometimes you have to watch what you ask for. So. Anyway, any more questions on that? Yeah.
About the elevation certificate, do you request the updated certificate every time if the property is in the flood zone?
If there already is an elevation certificate already, what I would do, usually that's okay, and that's good so long as no modifications have taken place. The elevation certificate is based upon the year of the property was built or remodeled, the height of it, because if you notice, like the ones near the beach, if you go to Waianae, Makaha area, they're on stilts. The reason why they're on stilts is to decrease the cost or eliminate the cost of flood insurance. That's the main reason. But if you are looking at a property for a buyer that's in the flood zone, I would call the listing agent and ask them, is there an existing flood cert? I'm going to make an offer because he's the same way as I am. We're super conservative. We'll investigate things even before making an offer. We want all this information ahead of time if we can. If they have an existing flood cert, I'll get it, send it to the lender and say, just out of curiosity, is this going to be satisfactory in underwriting? Because if they say no, I want to know that now. So when I write my contract, I'm not in the middle of escrow. Some agents are like in the middle, my lender needs, and I'm like, if I'm going to list that, I'm like, yeah, too bad. You didn't need to ask for that. I'm not doing that now, kind of thing. And they just go, well, we need it. Yeah, but you should have known. So I would, usually it's okay. 70-80% of the time it's fine. But some lenders have that expire. They want an updated one. So ask the listing agent if there is a flood cert. And if there is one, can you please send it to me so I can have the buyer's lender review it to make sure it's good. And if it is good, then great. If it's not good, then build it into the negotiation.
How long does it take usually to get it?
The flood cert, you'll get it the same time as you get the survey.
Do all licensed surveyors, are they all able to?
They're all
do the
able to
flood?
do it, yeah. Whether they want to or not is different, but the ones that I talk to, all of them will do it.
And it's only a few $100 more.
Yeah, if they do it at the same time.
Really?
If they don't do it at the same time, then it's a whole different site visit all over
Who
again.
are the guys you use?
Wes will do it.
He's not
Wes-
busy, he's not as busy anymore.
No, not as much.
Before you can get him.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wes Tangon is a
Yeah.
surveyor.
But he's trying to hire.
Well,
Who, Wes? He is?
how old is he?
Talk to him all the time. I don't know if I've ever met him.
He's the only one. He's like taking, everybody's talking about.
Yeah, there's not very many.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, but
Yes,
Okay, it's K4.
K3.
Okay, boundary encroachment. If encroachments onto an adjoining property or onto the property by an adjoining property.
Yeah, that's right. It sounds weird, but
Is
that's right.
revealed or discovered, buyer may elect to accept in writing such existing encroachments at its current location within blank days of discovery, or buyer shall instruct seller to, and seller shall use seller's reasonable efforts to A, remove such encroachment if acceptable to buyer at seller's and or the adjoining owner's sole costs and expense, or B, obtain encroachment agreements at sellers and or the adjoining owner's sole cost and expense with the affected adjoining owners, which is acceptable to buyer. And if neither A nor B occurs within blank days prior to closing, buyer may accept the encroachments or elect to terminate this purchase contract pursuant to paragraph 03. If in remedying and revealed encroachments, the encroachment is partially or totally removed, then seller shall be responsible for the correction of the survey. If paragraph K2 was checked to reflect any changes in the revealed encroachments no later than blank days prior to closing. Under chapter 669 Hawaii revised statutes, certain tolerance for discrepancies involving improvements built along the boundary line of the property for specific zonings are established, and such improvements may be considered de minimis.
Okay, so let's break this one down. So first sentence is if an encroachment is identified, right? So revealed or discovered, buyer may elect to accept it within it at its current location within X amount of days of discovery, which normally is when you give them the survey or when you receive the survey. And the buyer will instruct seller to either remove it or get an encroachment agreement with the neighbor that encroachment exists with, right? So one, it's going to be when you get the survey, is there an encroachment? Because that's when you're going to be notified that there is one. So as a buyer's agent, you're looking at that going, I see an encroachment. So
Right back.
what's an encroachment? You guys know or you guys know what de minimis is? Right? There's tolerance right up to 6 inches, 0.5 feet. So first thing, if there's a wall that the neighbor owns coming onto your property, but it's less than 6 inches, then it's not an encroachment. Or you don't need an agreement for that. There's tolerance. If it's beyond that, what it says is they can accept it, so buyer can accept it, or buyer can tell seller either have it removed at seller's expense and neighbor's expense, or get an agreement to allow it to stay that will run with the land. So no matter when this house is resold, that agreement will stay with the property, not with the owner. Okay, so if you're the seller's agent, it can get really tricky if you don't know the neighbor, or if the neighbor is very, cautious about things. They may not want to sign anything. Typically, what I hear is that wall has been here for 30 years. Why do I need to sign something now? And there's counters to all of this stuff, right, which I can explain if you guys are interested. But there's ways that you can go about approaching the neighbor and hopefully getting an approval to sign that. Now, so buyer goes, there's an encroachment. I'm not going to accept it the way it is, and I want an agreement. Well, if seller can't get the agreement, then buyer can cancel. And the way your typical timeline will read is from discovery, which is survey. Many sellers will not order the survey until they have an accepted offer. And depending on the surveyor's schedule, as a buyer, you may not get it for maybe a couple weeks, 3 weeks before closing. So just a quick note for sellers agents. I would strongly recommend that you have the seller order the survey before you even get on the market to identify, is there an encroachment? Because here's what happens. Surveys ordered after escrow, surveys delivered to buyer, survey discovers an encroachment. Buyer says, I want an agreement. Seller goes, I'll try, talks to the neighbor, can't get it. And then it says X amount of days prior to closing. Typically, you can put 5 days prior to closing. Huge hole in this contract for buyer to cancel the contract at the very last few days before closing. Right? So one is, as a buyer's agent, when you get it, walk the property with the survey in hand. Identify everything. You want to be able to explain to your client what's where, so that they don't read surveys. You guys will. So you guys will be able to read what it says. Some buyers don't even look at any of the documentation, right? I mean, it's you tell them, you explain why, but they don't always read it. So walk it with them, show them where everything is, explain to them what you know about the walls. Seller said this wall belongs to neighbor. Seller said this wall belongs to subject property. Identify any encroachments, asking them what they want to do. And then I always ask the buyers, what happens if you can't get it removed, or what happens if you can't get the agreement? What do you want to do? Right. So kind of put that in their ear ahead of time.
What would you say to a stubborn neighbor?
I'm sorry.
You said you had advice to say to stubborn neighbors, like.
Oh, yeah. So, depends on the severity of it. But basically what I'm trying to tell the neighbor is, this is a standard form. It identifies ownership of the wall. So let's say that my wall or subject property's wall encroaches into the neighbor. two things. One is it identifies who has to maintain it. No dispute there. So Mr. Neighbor, subject property is taking ownership of the wall. They will maintain the wall. So you don't have to worry about that. Two, if it ever degrades to the point where it cannot be rebuilt, then, it cannot be repaired, sorry, then they're gonna have to rebuild it on their property. So it protects you there. Third is, if you ever sell, Mr. Neighbor, guess what? You gotta provide a survey. And buyers typically are okay if it's identified, not when it's gray. And so if you identify it up front, you know that there's an encroachment, nothing you can do about it. It's clean as far as the buyer is concerned. And if they don't like it, then go buy something else. But at least you know what you're buying. And normally that's good enough.
Do people, like in the old neighborhoods?
Yeah.
Do people run into the fact that maybe they don't know who owns?
Yes.
actually owns it, and what you solve it?
That's a hard one. I mean, typically you're gonna look at it and say, this wall that was built, so many times, right, it's gonna be the same contractor building more than just one wall. They will build this way and they will build this way. So you're trying to use logic to say, look, this wall that goes this way and this way has an encroachment. So this is the property that's being sold. This is the neighbor's property. And they identify an encroachment on this segment of the wall. It goes in over 6 inches onto the neighbor's property, right? So, but you see that the wall runs this way and then it turns this way. So the logic is this guy, even though they don't know it, built the walls because it's the same wall that goes this way and this way. And so it makes sense for that encroachment to be this guy encroaching onto this guy. So you're just trying to work through it that way. Right. And if it's opposite, if this is the house that's being sold, then you're saying, hey, Mr. Neighbor, I think this is your wall. I mean, 90% of it is on your property and it returns that way. Same moss rock. There's no break in it. Right. So, but it happens, especially older neighborhoods. And you know what Chad talked about, where you have large encroachments, old neighborhoods can be pretty tricky. I've seen where water lines without any easement agreements run through other neighbors' properties. So there is some risk. I had one up in Pacific Heights because the meter is, so I had one up on Pacific Heights where Pacific Heights would go like this, then up this way. And he was down this other road. His water meter was not here, was above. And the line came through the neighbor's property to his house. So couldn't reach the neighbor to get an agreement to allow that water line to stay as is. So the route we took was contacted the city. Asked the city, can you service this house from the lower street? And they said, yes, they could. However, this would be the cost. So we just negotiated a credit for that cost because they couldn't give us an agreement for the water line coming up from above down below. So that, in that sense, the buyer was whole. He never did anything about it, but he got the credit. And they sold it since. So. Okay, what else can I say about that? So when your buyer, think about if there is an encroachment, whether or not you might want it, because if the neighbor's wall goes into the property that you're buying, and let's say it's pretty significant, you know, the flip side to getting the agreement is once you get it, it stays, unless the neighbor agrees to rip up that agreement. So if you ever want to push your wall out as far as you can, but that encroachment agreement prevents you from doing that, too bad, so sad. That's just how it is. It's an agreement. It's going to run with the land until somebody agrees to tear it up or until the wall degrades to where it can't be rebuilt. So I've had a situation where we were selling, we identified an encroachment that came in a foot into the subject property that we were selling. Agent wanted the agreement and I said, are you sure you want it? And he said, well, why wouldn't I want it? I said, well, once you get it, you can never push this wall back. So he talked to his broker, he goes, oh, we don't need it anymore. So I did that to save the seller from having to do the agreement and all the time and all that, right? So. Okay, who's next? Son, okay, Yeah.
Staking survey discrepancy. In the event the staking a survey report reveals a material fact which directly, substantially, and adversely affect the value of the property, the seller should make appropriate disclosures pursuant to paragraph 5(2), and the buyer may exercise the right to know.
so that's just a new disclosure, right? Is what that's talking about.
One question, another one.
Yeah.
About state shoreline certification, when do we request this? So I saw it in the oceanfront addendum.
Yeah, I don't have any experience with that, but I would assume if it's, if you're on the ocean or if you're near the water,
But there's like the option, there's to request the elevation or state shoreline certification, so there's a difference.
I would think you'd want both.
And the shoreline certification has an expiration date. So that's not that you get it once, but once with the house, it will expire.
The shoreline certification.
Certification
Oh.
expires. I don't know
What does
how-
it say?
I think it just kind of points out the relation of the property to the high water.
High water mark?
Yeah.
So it's telling you today
Yes.
where your property line ends based on high water
And
mark.
I think it's only like for a year or something like that. It has an expiration date.
It makes
so-
sense because look at the North Shore, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
that's fine. Concern.
are you trying to buy or sell North Shore?
I just live in the North Shore, but they currently just started farming on the North Shore. So
I'm not saying not to, but oh, that's tricky. Especially with all the news, right, that's going on. Whew, okay. All right, who's next? Emily.
Termite inspection, Leong. Buyer is aware termite infestation may affect the condition and value of real property and land. It is strongly recommended that buyer obtain permit inspection and receive a report to identify the extent of infestation and or damage to the property if any. The report may only address visible evidence of termite infestation and or damage in accessible areas. The report may not address whether the evidence indicates active, also known as live termite infestation. Seller agrees to disclose in writing in the seller's real property disclosure statement. And or any prior and or current termite infestation or damage of which the seller is aware.
Okay. So buyers can be very sensitive about termites. So there are two main types of termites. You guys are aware of the ground termites, right? And then the drywood termites. You guys are familiar with that? So you know that the ground termites are very destructive. Colonies are in the millions and they can do damage in weeks or months. And they can eat whole beams. Drywood termites fly in. So ground termites, you can do preventative things. You can do bait, you can ground treat. Drywood termites fly in. So ground termites need a water source. So typically that's where they're coming from the ground up. Drywood termites, their water source is the wood they eat. Slow moving colonies are in the hundreds or maybe thousands, but it takes a long time for them to do any significant damage to the home. Drywood termites will eat clear wood. So they'll eat like tack strips, they'll eat furniture, they'll eat cabinets. They fly in, they pair up, make a nest, and then they'll push out their fecal matter, right? And the color will depend on what on the wood they're eating. So if they're eating dark wood, it'll be dark. If they're eating light wood, it'll be light. So when the inspector does the inspection, whether it's a condo or a single family home, what he's looking for is evidence. So he's looking for like termite droppings, or in the case of ground termites, he's looking for mud trails. And then he'll identify where it is. So for a single family home, if it's found and appears to be active, it's rare that they're gonna say treat, spot treat. They're typically gonna say tent. For condos, kind of hard to tent. And I don't know if a heat treatment would be available anymore. They used to do that. I don't know if that would be considered acceptable anymore. So either they may spot treat in a condo, right? Or if it's significant, they may say remove and replace. Condos, if the doors open out into the open, out into the air, not into a hallway, enclosed hallway, sometimes you'll see drywood termites eating the doors, or at least infecting the doors, right? So in those cases, either the door is replaced or you take it off and put it in a vault, and then bring it back. A vault would then fumigate it. You'd fumigate it in a vault. In a townhouse, typically the association is responsible for that. So you're notifying them. You gotta check with the lender. I'm not sure how that works. Now, lenders, do they need to see the termite report? Who says yes? Lenders need to see the termite report.
If it's VA or not.
Yeah, VA says they need to see it, but other lenders typically don't. So I would recommend, if when the termite report comes out, you instruct escrow not to, because it's going to go to escrow, not to forward it to the lender.
And a lot of the times they need them like the proof of treatment.
Yeah. If they find out about it, yeah. And as a buyer, right, you want it remedied. You want it either remove, replace, spot treat, or tented. And you want evidence of that before closing.
I've had some companies say like, oh, we went back out there, but we don't give a certificate that we went back out there. Like
They treated
but they won't like give a certificate, which the lender needs.
if the lender found out about it. So how did they deal with that?
Like they said they would write an email saying that they went back out there, but they wouldn't give a certificate, and then the
Okay.
lender
Except,
underwriting said no, and then she like went back and forth with them like 4 times, and then underwriting had to call the termite.
and that was satisfactory. So they got what they wanted, not in the right form though.
No, that all took like 5 days, so like it was.
And it's typically right before closing, right? That these things happen. Because termite is what, 15 days prior to close? You find evidence of, then you try and make calls to find somebody to go out there. So that's at least a couple days.
And it was like for final loan approval, like it was like once under, like you didn't know underwriting was gonna say that until it got to underwriting.
So as a buyer, let's say that the lender never found out about it. Inspector said you need to tent. And let's say that buyer really wanted to get into the house. Tenting could occur, but not until after closing. Would you want to, and sellers willing to just pay the termite fumigation company through escrow at closing so that buyer doesn't have to worry about that. Why wouldn't you want to wait until after closing to have it tented?
Because they could break stuff.
What could they break?
Shingles.
Yeah. What do they do, right? What do they do to tent a house? They walk on the roof. They put up a heavy tent. And so it could break shingles. They could break the gutters.
All the landscaping.
Oh, that's for sure. You got to let buyers know anything inside of that tent probably will die. So you know all those nice plants probably will die. And if you tell them that, they're okay. If you don't tell them that, it's a problem. After closing, because the plants don't die right away, but after closing, right? Like Kent, all these plants that I really love next to the house, they're all dead now. Is the seller going to replace them? So, yeah, I would say to buyer, unless there's some super important reason why they want to close and then tent after, here are the risks. And if you're willing to take it on and document it, you can do it after, as long as you can fund the loan and close. but make sure that they're aware of what the issues are if they were to tent after closing. And by the way, the tenting company, they take no responsibility. They break things, it's on you. They take no responsibility for that stuff.
Did you want to put it closing to negotiate it?
Yeah, you would have to negotiate. And even after, it's, you negotiate, let's say that they, tent comes off, reinspect. Because unless you reinspect, the termite company is not going to tell you that they broke something.
Kind of a hard negotiation because the seller is gonna be like, well, you're the one that wanted tented.
Well, it says in here that they're responsible to remedy it, and it says in here that they need to deliver it to you the same condition as J1. But I get your
See
point.
a seller like getting mad.
Yeah.
That now they have to
Yeah.
renegotiate something.
Yeah. It gets tricky when they damage something that was going to break anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, like a fence that was really in poor condition. Yeah. So it can get tricky, but as an agent, it doesn't hurt to ask to represent your client and say, look, it wasn't broken before. I don't care about condition. It's now broken and somebody has to address it because it's broken. So, this is what we want. Yeah, I would approach it that way. Okay, in the back, Kyle, is that Kyle? Kyle? Okay, Kyle, why don't you read L3 and then pause and then read L4.
Sorry, L3 or
L3 first, and then we'll talk about it, and then you read L4 after.
In the event the inspection report indicates there is visible damage to the improvements caused by termite infection, and said damage directly, substantially, and adversely affects the value of the property, then seller shall make appropriate disclosures under paragraph 5.
So you may have already done, or you typically would have already done your home inspection. And so everything's fine. Termite inspector goes out, and I don't know, some of the guys that inspect, they will tap everywhere. And what they're looking for is voids in the wood, right? Because the termites are smart. They'll eat inside, but they won't pop out because then, lizards will come eat them. So they'll tap looking for voids. The home inspector is not going to be looking at the main beam to figure out if that was termite eaten, but the termite inspector typically would do that. And so if all of a sudden now the termite inspector says, this beam, it's fine up to about here, and then over here, there seems to be pretty significant damage, and it could be structural. So that is a new disclosure. And that will be something that you definitely want to address with seller's agent and with buyer to identify what to do. Right? Ask for replacement, ask for credit, whatever it is. But move forward only in the event that buyer wants to do it. Maybe they're a contractor, maybe they're going to renovate this portion of the house. Who knows? But it just says if you find something, then it hasn't already been identified, it's a new disclosure. Okay, L4.
Buyer acknowledges that there may be latent or hidden termite infestation and or damage of which seller and seller's brokerage firm are not aware, and for which seller and seller's brokerage firm will not be held liable. Seller's brokerage firm, buyer's brokerage firm, and their respective licensee make no representation or warranty that the property is free from latent or hidden termite infestation and or damage. Buyer and seller release the brokerage firm and their respective licensees from any and all liability with regard to any latent or hidden termite infestation and or damage.
Okay. So everything is a visual. They'll do they can do a tapping kind of thing. They'll use flashlights, they use mirrors, but they can't take things apart to look for termites. So just saying, can't guarantee it, right? Even though you hire a termite inspector, can't guarantee that they're going to find everything. So any questions on termite? The section in general.
Have you ever seen the property followed by from termite?
I haven't. Have you?
No. But I kind of say that to my clients when they start freaking out. They're like, "Ugh, termites." I'm like, it's okay. Properties don't usually fall out because of termites.
Yeah.
But I was just curious about it.
It's it's all about education, because especially if you're not familiar with termites, when people hear termites, they think that the house is going to fall down.
It's bad, so I think it's a good to prep, like, it's okay.
Yeah.
It
And
is.
and I use an analogy. I said, so my house has drywood termites. I see evidence of that. And what you do is you just fumigate every 5 years or so, right? If you want to. But I said, the house is not going to fall down. What I do worry about is ground termites, because ground termites can be very destructive.
But even then, you just do ground treatment.
Yeah. So you, at that point, the inspector will probably recommend ground treatment, and then ongoing maybe do I don't think a seller would do that, but buyer could do like a bait station or something of that sort.
Are there certain parts of the island that have more activity versus the other? I mean, because Kailua is known for a lot of rats. There's a big rat.
People or
problem.
animals?
But
I'm kidding.
but so I was just curious if there's, a certain part of the island that.
I've heard like where they've done development where they've like Hawaii Loa maybe, where when they graded, there might have been debris under, but they put the soil over it, which then may have attracted termites, but I'm not 100%.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue might be, I think there were some developments that may have used clear wood. This is a long time ago when they built, and so a lot more susceptible. Untreated lumber. Yeah.
I've actually seen it come up in CMU. Actually, a house wall with CMU.
Yeah.
Ground.
Yeah.
And something was up the wall. I guess they accidentally hit it or something, and literally the concrete just kind of disintegrated and opened up, and there was a ground termite nest.
No way.
It was probably 8 feet tall, and they had the sections. It was great. You would never believe that, like, they're eating that.
I don't think they're eating it.
They ate the center little posts of those CME blocks. That was disintegrated.
Host, right?
The little center. But yes, it was.
They will try and go through things to get to the food.
It just
So-
takes one tiny little crack in the
But the
concrete.
food is the wood.
Not the concrete.
Not the, yeah, so it's not the food, but they were eating it, and that's part of their whole mess.
Yeah.
It was terrible.
Nasty stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. M1.
Section M, additional seller obligations regarding documents. M1, mandatory provisions of documents. A, in accordance with Hawaii revised statutes, chapter 508B 3.5. If the residential real estate property being offered for sale is subject to a recorded declaration, the seller shall provide buyer with the following documents and any amendments or supplements thereto to the extent applicable. 1. Articles of incorporation or other documents, if any, creating the corporation or association whereby the corporation or association has the power to enforce the declaration. 2. Bylaws of the corporation or association. 3. Declaration or similar organizational documents and any exhibits thereto. 4. Any rules relating to the use of common areas, architectural control, maintenance of units, or payment of money as regular assessment or otherwise in connection with the provisions, maintenance, or service of the service for the benefit of the property or as a real estate or other real property or common areas. B. If the residential real property is otherwise subject to restrictions or conditions on use, either because of covenants contained in the deed for the property or because of other recorded documents The disclosure shall also include all documentation related to any restrictions or conditions, including but not limited to any unrecorded rules or guidelines that may have been issued by any entity responsible for enforcing those restrictions or guidelines in a manner consistent with and subject to the seller's duty of good faith as provided for under section 508(b)(9). Examples of restrictions or conditions on use may include, yet are not limited to, easements, encroachment agreements, covenants, conditions and restrictions of the CC and Rs, and any other encumbrances that remain on title after closing as described in paragraph G2.
So I lost you. Can you repeat that whole thing again? Oh, that's a mouthful, huh? Okay. Hiroko, why don't you finish M1, starting from C?
The seller shall provide prior the following documents to the extent that they exist and are obtainable. Approved minutes of the last 3 board of directors meetings, articles of incorporation, association and amendments, bylaws and amendments, copy of any or pending litigation complaints filed by or against the owners association and or its directors that are currently unresolved. Covenants, conditions and restrictions, current and or proposed budget, current financial statement, current house rules, declaration and designs, matters and or guidelines, insurance summary, lenders disclosure, minutes of the last annual meeting, and community documents, project information form RR 105C, reserve study of summary, subdivision and or title documents, others be specific.
Okay, why don't you pause there? Chad, so how do you go through that with your buyer client? Like this, what we've read so far, right? All this stuff's gonna come in. How do you position this with buyer
How do I explain what this whole section
and
means?
what they need to do?
So warn and educate, right? You can't wait for instruction yet, because usually this comes up for me anyways. I bring this up at least the first time I'm writing a contract. You don't have to do this every single time, but you want to train them the first time, because you might write 20 contracts. In that first one, I explained to them that we're going to receive a set of documents. If it's a single family home that's in an association or what we call a CPR or a PUD, the documents are going to be limited. Still important, but limited. If it's a condo or townhome, they're going to be extensive and they're super important.
Before you go on, what about, to add to that, what about developments that have restrictions, covenants? Would that be part of like Hawaii Kai?
Yeah.
Mililani?
Yeah, still super important.
Single family.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because you're
So this is not just for condos. is
no,
my
it's
point,
just
right?
this is, yeah. And also some of the notes that I wrote down is you can't delete this section. If you guys look next to M1, is there a little block, a bracket that says NA or X? The reason I bring that up is when I review contracts, I often see people go delete M1. And I'm like, why are you deleting M1? There's no space to delete it. It's not supposed to be deleted.
So state law.
Yeah. And then they'll say, well, there's no documents. Okay, then we want them to go through the exercise of the process, the back and forth of telling me that there's no documents, because if you delete it, the whole provision is now removed when in fact you could have had a protection in place for the buyer. And I'll give you an example. This is actually, I don't know if you remember, this is a deal that we were on when we worked together. It was a single family home in Kaneohe area, a single family home. We represent the seller. The buyer wrote the offer. Again, we give contrary advice, right? Depending on who we're on, what side we're on. The buyer wrote it, delete M1. I didn't stop them because I don't represent the buyer, I represent the seller. The seller happened to be a judge. So an attorney and a judge. And do you remember this one at all? I was talking to the seller and she was kind of laughing too. And she goes, they should have never deleted M1. And the reason, there was no HOA. but she was the original owner that had the project, I think was like 40 something years old, original owner. There was an HOA that had since gone bankrupt. But on title, it shows that there's shared appreciation and there's easements that the HOA owns. And so it causes a little bit of cloud on title. And it's not super detrimental, but could it affect the market value? In a hot seller's market, probably not. But when the market starts to be more balanced or maybe moves over to buyer's market, it could pose a marketability issue where a buyer might go, well, this one has a cloud on title versus the one across the street doesn't. I'm either going to buy this one or I'm willing to pay more for this one than I am this one. So if you're the buy side and you accept the delete M1 or you've written it as delete M1, you don't even have the opportunity to see what that is. And you kind of walk into like a little bit of a landmine. So never, ever, ever delete M1.
Did she say put it back in?
No, she just, because she's an attorney. So I'm not going to give her legal advice, but she's smart enough to have written that into the SRPDS to say, this is a defunct bankrupt HOA that, to my knowledge, went bankrupt in 1987 or whatever there is an easement. She's disclosed all of that. It's disclosed. And as Kimo Stone would say, you can't be sued for what you disclose, but you can for what you don't. So she's not the one that drafted the purchase contract. They did. So
she still disclosed it.
Yeah, she still disclosed it.
Okay, gotcha.
Because that's smart.
Yeah, gotcha.
She didn't correct it though, because why would she add back in a protection for the buyer when they're the ones that drafted it like that?
Yep.
The other part of it too is, which I see often, is same thing as I mentioned before with the survey, is accepting someone else's condo docs. So we read a lot of different things that are in there.
Mhm.
There's certain things in there that are super time sensitive and super important and pertinent to be fresh. Right? So sometimes people go, oh, I have those docs. I did a deal last year. Like, okay, the things that people are thinking of is house rules, bylaws. If you ever see the bylaws and articles of incorporation on condo docs, it looks like it's from the 60s. So you think, oh, nothing has changed. But what it might not be updated is minutes. That's so important. I think we were talking about that before, right? Minutes can tell you, you can be a fly on the wall in the HOA's meeting with minutes. You can see if is there going to be an assessment coming? Are they talking about roof? Are they talking about all these other kind of things? Minutes are super important. That's done monthly. Any pending litigation, that's up to the minute. We have no idea, which could be detrimental to someone getting financing. Current financial statement. Do they have enough reserves? Because there's a threshold. I think it's 10% is what Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac looks for. Proposed budget. So that's capital expenditures and what they're planning. If their reserves are $100,000 and suddenly they're planning things that's going to be 1.5 million, that's a problem because there's either going to be an assessment or a loan coming or both. Annual minutes, those are owners talking. And so owners are showing up to annual and talking about you guys won't do this and this is mismanaged. And you're hearing all these kind of things. So that shows up. And then to me, one of the most important things is the RO 105C. The RO 105C is the report that the lender looks at, which is kind of a snapshot of all the pertinent things that show up on here. It shows the delinquency ratio. It shows if there's any, because this happens for some smaller projects. No one owner can own more than 10% of a project. Otherwise, it disqualifies, it becomes unlendable. Owner occupancy ratios, like these kind of things matter for someone qualifying for a loan. So if on the buy side, if you overlook some of these things, you can put and this is a big one. This one you'll get sued for this. If you overlook it or so, yeah, no problem, just delete M1 or we'll accept your existing docs. And by the way, even if your guys, because it's the RO 105C is things for a lender. If your buyer is all cash, that doesn't mean you should be skipping steps. The only step that's really skipped is the finance contingency because they don't need financing, but you shouldn't skip over some of the due diligence that protects them.
So I have a couple of comments on that regarding if you're a seller, just to kind of reinforce what you said, some sellers may want to use their old documentation. And when I hear that, the first thing I tell them is, you are opening yourself up for liability here, because let's say you miss a page, not on purpose,
One
but it
page.
fell off. And that was a key page.
And what if that page, for instance, was the section of the house rules that say no dogs allowed, and then they bought
Yeah.
the home because they love Fluffy that they've had for 10 years. That's part of the family.
Yeah, so you don't know, right? So why open yourself up for liability? Because a lot of guys will say, I'll save $1,000 by just giving them what they're asking for that I already have. So, well, I would not recommend you do that. Get a third party to do that. And the other thing is positioning with the buyer that they are responsible to review all these documents. You are not responsible to review it and then give them advice on that, because you're not an expert in reviewing all this information.
But please review it.
So you tell them that, but then you review it on your own. Is kind of the way that I like to do it, so that I don't. Once they hear from me that I'm going to review the documents, what do a majority of them want to do? They don't want to look at it. Say, why would I look at it? You know what you're doing. You look at it. You tell me what you find. So I say, here's the documents. Here's your homework. Read everything. Make sure that you're comfortable. And then I keep referring to R6. Look at R6. R6 tells you who you are not. You're not an expert in these condo docs. So position it that way. Don't take on that added liability. It's just going to cause you more stress. And on top of that, you're not able to give them that kind of advice, no matter what you think. Right. So Chad pointed out all the important ones. Yeah, definitely RO105C.
I have a question. So
Yeah.
it happened really recently. So what if the buyer owns the same, the property, the same building?
Yeah.
The buyer asks to delete it. What are the good ways?
So we warn, educate, wait for instruction, right? I warn them as to, I understand that you own in the building. I understand that you probably have the same documents that the seller might have. I would still recommend you go through it in the same process as a buyer that doesn't own in the building. And the other part of it too is I would ask them, what do you hope to achieve? Do you think are we competing with another offer and you're hoping to be positioned in a better situation? Because for something that's so minor, like you're taking an important item off the table that might not need to be taken off the table. That's one, right? So I'm warning them, I'm educating them, and I'm waiting for instruction. But if they still advise me to, because this is actually happening right now on something, I have a clause for that. So I'll insert a clause into section Q1, which is basically the buyer instructs us to remove M1, although Keller Williams Honolulu highly recommends that they get new copies of all blah, 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 and therefore buyer indemnifies and holds harmless KW Honolulu for any information that might be discovered and found during the escrow period because of the normal documents received during M1.
That's just because they don't want to take.
Well, he's on the buy side. So is he trying to position himself to be accepted?
Yeah, and we were really competing. This was so weird to even a seller's agent said, oh, I'm sure a lot of, buyers who's gonna put in an offer have multiple properties in this building. So why would you, waste time to order M1?
Can I tell you another thing too with M1 is it could show up on the disclosures, but another thing too is just because some people think you own in the building and you're going to get every single unit has exactly the same thing, and that's not necessarily true. There might be a unit that has a different tax assessment, that has a fine by the HOA, that has different documents, one or two of them, that's a difference maker between, oh, my document or my unit's on this side of the building and there's some sort of leak or some sort of assessment that's affecting this side of the building, whatever the thing is. How do you know? So you're just running the risk of just assuming that every single document for every single unit is exactly the same.
I think you also just write a clause like, instead of deleting M1, like one of you has the buyer pay for the documents on behalf of the seller, and then two, like something like almost like a J1 where it's like buyer agrees not to renegotiate based off of any information from M1, but can still cancel pursuant to O2 or something that's like not deleting it, but just like saying like, we're gonna be easy with M1.
Yeah, that way you accomplish both for buyer and for seller.
Now, I love that.
Yeah,
absolutely. No, that's great.
Yeah.
But the thing to keep in mind too is the negotiations that we have aren't always with, like, in our minds, we explain it and everyone in this room is like, oh, that makes perfect sense. The problem is that agent right there, whomever that is, might be new, might not be experienced, might be very experienced, but be egotistical, might not be growth minded. So you have to make sure that the way you're explaining it, and one of the things I always tell people is when you explain something to the other side, don't do it in a way that someone with an ego is going to take offense to it. Like, I'll give you an example is, we don't use it often now anymore when the market has shifted, but an escalation clause, which you guys probably know what that is, right? That will compete with another offer and so on and so forth. Most people know what that is because it was used a lot, especially during COVID. Prior to COVID, not, believe it or not, it was used, but kind of depending on the neighborhood, depending on circumstance or what have you. If you called and said to another agent, hey, you know what an escalation clause is? The answer is going to be, oh yeah, sure. And now you're relying on like, oh shoot, does he really know what that is? Because that individual is the one who's presenting your offer to the seller. So I always go, I know you're super experienced. I'm sure you know what an escalation clause, just to let you know, I wrote it in such a way to make sure that we're the highest competing offer because we'll beat any other offer by $5,000. I know you know that already. I just want to make sure that you saw it. I'm not insulting him. I'm educating him without educating him. Do you know what I mean? So similarly, stuff like that, I think that's great. You gotta explain it. Yeah. No, I mean, I love it. Yeah. But you just have to make sure that it's explained in a way that's non-confront. What we do is that's the beauty of negotiation is a lot of, so my background is I went to law school, right? And when I was in college, we had to sit and audit courtroom debates and what have you. And I was sitting in the back and attorneys would be at each other like this person, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh my God, this is getting like super contentious. Like I thought they were going to like, throw a fight or throw hands in the middle of the courtroom. Then we break for lunch. And these two attorneys who were yelling and screaming are literally sitting next to each other having sandwich. Like, so how's Betty? Oh, she's great. How's the kids? Did you go on? I'm like, what is happening? They go right back in the courtroom and they're back at it again. And it's unbelievable how attorneys have the ability to turn that on and turn it off, and they compartmentalize what they need to do for the client and when it needs to come out and what have you, right? What I've seen with real estate agents, everything they do, they take personally. So when someone goes, something is listed for 600 and they're like 500, I've literally had agents go, how dare you? And I can't believe that you're offering me less than, and I'm like, this is not your property. Just present the offer, please. They take personal offense to it. So it's fine that we know that, but how do you combat that? You have to be super neutral, super empathetic, and super compassionate when you're negotiating. That is a skill that you're going to come out with an advantage on if you just go in there knowing that person can be a little off, could be a little emotional, could get a little wild. But if you present it in such a way, if you know what you're dealing with, you will go much, much further. If they get crazy, you're like, oh, I'm so sorry that you took it like that. It's not personal. As you know, we have the duty of instruction, both you and I was instructed by my client to make that offer, or these kind of things. So make sure that if there's anything, is like that part of negotiation is super, super important. Super important. Yeah.
How does the seller get all of these documents? They go to like the association and ask.
Yeah. So associations typically will never give it out. So how would a seller have it? The seller would typically have it because they'll have it from when they purchased the property.
Okay.
Now, if the challenge then is if the seller's lived in the property for 15 years, or I have some investment properties that if you ask me for my condo docs, I'm like, I don't know. I have no clue where they are. So it's in their best interest to reorder it, like Kent was saying, but they should have had all the stagnant stuff, the static stuff. They should have that already from when they purchased it.
And those documents cost money.
They do. Most associations, if you call the association, even if it's an owner, they're likely not going to give it to you. In fact, most associations subcontract with some other document housing company, like DocuTreeve, for instance, is the biggest one. And if you go to DocuTreeve as an example, and you select an association, you can select which it is and grab all the documents. I would also advise too, not letting a seller be in charge of that, because if you're like, yeah, just go get your documents on DocuTreeve, they're going to select the cheapest one. And now they're going house rules. And you're like, oh, I need the whole packet. And they're like, well, this one was $25. I don't want to spend the $500. Like you need to get the whole thing. And the other thing too is in some areas, like Ken alluded to, like Mililani, for instance, if you have a condo or townhome in Mililani, there's two sets of documents that you got to order for the building and then for the community,
Mililani Town.
and you can't skip because that's equally important. That's part of M1.
Been in a situation before, actually often, like you said, like you want to do your due diligence before you're writing an offer. And a lot of clients have questions about the condo or whatever before, and you're like, we'll get that in escrow, but they're like, well, what if I don't want to write an offer based off of this information? And I know Chad sold in there last week. Can I go ask Chad for his condo docs before I write an offer? Like, are you okay within our brokerage sharing condo docs, not using them for the actual escrow or deleting M1, but like for a pre-due diligence?
I mean, there's nothing, there's nothing wrong with that, with the exception of what Kent was saying too, is that we can't take ownership if there's something that's missing on it. Like, if we have what we think is 100% complete, but it's missing a page and we didn't even know it, we don't want to be held liable or responsible for that. But
Yeah, I
so,
just like asked other agents, like, hey, can I see this? My client has a question and I see you sold here, like, and they get kind of weird about it. They're like.
Well, they don't own it.
Yeah.
It depends, right? If they're a buyer. They as we don't own it as an agent, we may have it. So I would go back to the buyer and say, is it okay if I share it? But I think as an agent, it's good to review those things just for your own information, right?
Often, like I often am like, "Ugh, I just wish I had the condo docs now.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, I know Chris probably has a copy at core because he's helping everybody.
Yeah, I would check with the TC. I will also check with your lender.
lenders like Pac Rim houses all of them.
Like, not to, yeah, like not to delete the section, but just like.
No, just for your own information.
Yeah, just to kind of sneak peek it or something.
Yeah.
Sure.
Isabella.
The same thing about short-term rentals.
And
Each
that's-
building has its own thing and they all do something different. It's like we should have one location where we can just be like nice.
It's really an administrative thing. I mean, KW could do it, but who's gonna take
But
responsibility?
yeah, because the other part of it too is
Compile
these
it.
things can, if there's, I don't know how many condos there are, and then of them, how many allow for short-term rentals that are considered condo tels. The issue is if they change rules, then we're saying, hey, guys, we have a library of all these documents we're housing. If it changes, now people are like, you didn't update the thing, now it's
Yeah,
wrong
it's-
information. It's tough to
it'd be a
keep up with
nightmare.
that.
Yeah,
But it's okay to ask, as long as you ask the owner of the document.
Yeah,
It's okay to
and then provide the disclaimer that these documents aren't freshly ordered, they're archived.
The HOA or the department?
Yeah.
They're not gonna-
You can always ask, but 99% of the time, they're gonna refer you to their document housing site.
they want
or
you to pay
company.
for it.
So what I did in a recent condo sale is I ordered partial docs and then I added them to the listing under supplemental, so like. All the house rules, all of those kind of things, so that, because you're right,
Yeah,
if
that'd be
somebody's
great.
moving or wanting to put in an offer on a condo and you're like, well.
So
there's
one of the
restrictive.
things that we did, something that we were proud of is when we did a listing, we were ahead. I don't even think anyone does this that I know of, but we were ahead of things way before. So we would do survey. If prelim was in there, if we have trust documents or like these kind of things, we put it in supplemental so that any potential buyer, we're like, those things are already, SRPDS is already completed and in there. Because we want to, we'd rather and see something that you don't like and not make an offer rather than us go into escrow and then we got to cancel and go back onto the market 14 days later.
Yeah, I found that super helpful because in a few homes we did that as well, so everything's upfront. They should see.
Yeah.
What they're entering
Yeah.
into.
Yeah, the problem is you run out of space. I think that's the problem we ran into. We had too many documents, couldn't upload
Yes,
everything.
absolutely, you can't, but
Yeah.
certainly the core.
Yeah.
Needs it to be within a certain amount of days, so if the property's been sitting on the market,
Yep.
then you need to pay for it twice.
Or just the updates, certain documents that are full, like meeting minutes and such, but like just some of the core that would help them understand the property is kind of what I did.
You know what, some lenders will also do, just as a tip, right? The financials are really important. But I'm honest with you guys when I say I look at some of that stuff and I can't make heads or tails out of it. Sometimes it's pretty clean, sometimes it's like, I don't know what I'm looking at.
because there are different formats.
Yeah, they don't, there's no
Yeah.
standard, right? And there probably is, but not as standard as I would like to see.
I do teach a class on some of the kind of the cheat sheet way of looking at it, but it's still not
That would be good.
100% comprehensive because to his point, they're all a little different in its format.
But your lender
Yeah.
may be able to help you with that.
Yes.
So I've done it where I've looked at it and then my client was very anal. She's a financial kind of person. So I said, you know what, why don't you talk to your lender? Because they will explain this to you. So they were both, financially literate, right? They're literate on how to look at these financial documents. So they could have a good discussion and I'm out of it.
And you put the onus on them.
Yeah, and I'm listening, but I don't have to take responsibility for that, for saying the wrong thing. So anyway, different ways, right, to approach it. So lenders are really important.
Question, you said something about like a home in Mililani, they had town documents?
Oh, so Mililani, the condominium, right, the townhouse or whatever, will have their own documents. But Mililani has a town association, separate set of documents.
So the important thing to know is if you're if you're doing a listing presentation, for instance, and you're doing one that's in, Makakilo for a townhome or whatever it is, you could easily say, just so you know, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, some of the costs that you can, expect to pay is the survey, which is $800 to $1,000, condo docs, which is anywhere between $400 to $600. Like you're going through the list. You have to know that for the Mililani, because if it's a property in Mililani, you have to say, and there might be 2 sets of association documents, so it might be double that. I don't know. We don't upcharge that. That's what your association is charging for those documents. So that's important to know because usually the seller's the one that's flipping the bill for that.
Oh, yeah.
We didn't get anywhere when you left. We were just talking about documents. M2, right?
So who's reading now? I'm lost.
I think you pick up at D.
Oh, D, okay.
Okay, seller at seller's expense shall provide the above documents to buyer no later than blank days after the acceptance date. On receipt of the above documents, buyer shall provide seller with a written acknowledgement within blank days of receipt. Upon receipt of the documents provided pursuant to HRS 508D, buyer shall have blank days 15 if left blank to rescind and terminate the purchase contract pursuant to paragraph 02. In the event that the purchase contract is rescinded or terminated, buyer agrees to promptly return to seller or seller's agent any hard copy documents provided to the buyer. Buyer shall reimburse seller for the cost of the documents if they are not returned within blank days of electing rescission or termination of this purchase contract unless seller is in default.
Okay, so D is seller needs to provide it. E is buyer will have X amount of days to review and then cancel if they don't like what they see in the documents. And then F is if you cancel, then you got to return the documents back to the seller, right? Okay,
Or pay.
or pay for it.
You want me to keep going?
Yeah, why don't you read M2? That's fine.
M2, delivery of documents. Buyer agrees to the delivery of the documents in any of the following formats. Hard copies printed and delivered, electronically formatted documents on CD or DVD, electronically formatted documents via email or internet address where the documents are located.
So what is standard? You want,
So what I tell everyone, because this ties into the previous paragraph, is it's best to select electronically formatted via email or internet address where it can be located because there's nothing to return.
so those two you check?
Yeah, the other
Okay.
two you NA. Now, I forgot the association, it's one in Kapolei. You literally have to pick it up and they give you a binder.
Colina
Colina does that too. There's another one.
Hillside, because I own one there.
There's another one.
I tried to order the condo docs. They go, yeah, it's ready. Come pick it up. And I go, oh no, can you send it to me? No, you have to come pick it up.
Yeah.
I had to drive to Colina to pick up those darn documents. That's the only way I could get them.
Yeah,
It's ridiculous, right? They make it so difficult.
Yeah, it's when
please.
So we had it in books, and that's what I was paying for. So now if it's electronically, you're still paying for it though, as if it was.
Well, because you're not paying for you're not paying for the paper, you're paying for them to house the updated data because technically things should be updated every month. Minutes and financials and those kind of things.
But basically, the association puts that data in, and then, but that's, so you go directly.
If you go to like DocuTreeve, then they'll give you a link that you can download it, and that link is good for like whatever, 10 days or whatever it is.
It's a scam. They charge,
It's a
they
scam.
charge too much.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, there's no competition for them. You want it or you don't want it. Pay it.
M3, documents issued during escrow period. Seller shall provide buyer with any additions, supplements, modifications, and amendments to the documents described in M1, A, B, and C, above which are issued during the escrow period. If there is any information in these documents that directly, substantially, and adversely affects the value of the property, then the seller shall provide an amended disclosure statement pursuant to paragraph I.
Okay, so Chad, how do you guys handle that? Because you order the docs are delivered. And then there's an update, but nobody's aware of it before you close. So I think Better Homes,
Yeah.
right before closing,
I
will
hate this.
ask, send us the updates, if any.
Yeah, but also there, Better Homes, Coldwell, and Locations are the ones that I know of. There's some other smaller brokerages that do this too. This is again, one of those things, contrary advice, right? Is if you're making an offer, and you're on the buy side and that one of those companies are on the sell side, their standard addendum that they include says in there that any information that the buyer discovers or finds out, whether it be through J1 or M1, consider that the seller already gave you an amended
We talked
disclosure,
about that already.
right? But so in reverse, that's a great idea.
And that's going to be taken out, right? Isn't that illegal? Tony said it was illegal.
Well, it shouldn't be allowed because they're basically trying to override a statute. SRPDS is based on statute. It's not based on like, can you do me a favor? Would you mind just writing in this thing? It's not that. It's literally a statute. So on the flip side of that, you know, it's tricky because if the seller doesn't get a copy of that, the seller wouldn't know. But at the same time, one of the things that we've consulted attorneys with is the seller is not held accountable for what they don't know. They're held to a standard of what they do know that they may not have disclosed. So, but it's tricky. That's why it is important to make sure that the seller, you know, I always tell our sellers, if it's in a condo, townhome, or anything like that, before we close, if you get any assessments, any new information, condo docs, anything from your HOA, please let me know before closing. I got to disclose that information. Even if it's minor, cutting down the tree, just let the other side know they're cutting down this tree, whatever it is, because people are strange. It's if a buyer cancels because, well, I thought that thing that's going to provide shade for, you know, you never want to get in the middle of that. So I always ask, it's really important to make sure that the seller provide you with up-to-date information prior to closing, up to closing.
So I'm sorry, I was texting. So what was the answer?
Okay. And
Do we ask? Do we ask?
Yeah, we absolutely ask for the seller to just give you updated information from
When like a week prior to close or 2 weeks?
up till closing. Let me know anything that any information that you might get from the HOA.
But is there something that you proactively ask for, or is that a blanket statement that you say?
It's a
upfront?
blanket statement that I always tell them. Anything, first of all, any adverse anything with the property, let me know. But especially if you're getting something in writing, be it from the HOA, from the property tax assessor's office, from like the city and county of Honolulu, anything like that, I need to know about. Like, you gotta let me know, because we gotta make sure that I protect you and it's disclosed. That's the blanket statement that I
You
give
know,
to.
and I
to-
would call it correspondence with the HOA instead of updates, because.
Sure, yeah, correspondence is fine.
People,
Yeah.
I didn't think that was an update.
Yeah,
So if you tell them, let me know of any correspondence.
sure.
You have or the HOA
Yeah.
have with you.
Good point.
Going?
Yes, please.
And for review of documents, buyers advise the brokerage firm's scope of service does not include the interpretation of documents provided. Brokerage firm recommends that buyers consult with a licensed attorney and or CPA with expertise in real estate, condominium, cooperative, subdivision, PDU, and or homeowner's land community documents to review and explain such documents to buyer. Buyer acknowledges that the maintenance fee, the homeowners or community association fees, or any other fees or charge are reflected in the documents provided to the buyer for review and approval may be increased in the future.
Yeah, so it's telling you, we're not experts in this, so have them consult with an attorney or CPA, right? All right, and you want to read, Chad? You want me to read? I'll read, you text me. Okay, delivery of possession of the property free of tenants. Seller shall deliver possession of the property at closing, vacant and free of tenants. Tenants' possessions, leases, property management, contracts, short-term rental reservations, or any other rental or service commitments. Or, so it's above, right? It says choose N1 or N2. So either or. N2, seller shall deliver all rental documents executed and or binding between seller and tenant. Seller shall also deliver any executed property management contract. Rental documents may include the following: rental agreement, security deposit statement, property collection form, lead-based paint disclosure, pet and or animal addenda, vacating instructions, renewal energy act addendum, short-term vacation rental reservations. Seller shall also provide copies of the following documents. Seller shall provide copies of such documents and any amendments or addenda to buyer within X days after the acceptance date. If within X days of receipt of such document, buyer does not accept the property based on the information contained in the selected documents, buyer may elect to terminate this purchase contract pursuant to O2. Any security deposits or vacation rental deposits will be transferred to buyer at closing. Seller and buyer and brokerage firms highly recommend that buyer hire a licensed property management company and may want to do so prior to closing. So when you buy, it's either or. There are cases where it could be both though, right?
Vacant and a tenant?
What was the scenario?
Well, if you have like if you have a property that you live in and you have like an ADU or maybe a couple of cottages,
Maybe that was it,
maybe you want
yeah.
to keep the cottages.
Yeah, maybe
you
that
know,
was it.
tenants in the cottages or the
Yeah.
ADU,
Okay.
and you want to have the main house vacated or vice versa, you know,
Yeah.
maybe you stay in a cottage and rent out the main house.
So on the delivery free of tenants, that's pretty standard. If there is a rental in there, make sure buyer understands. Well, one, if you're gonna be a owner occupant and there's a loan involved, typically there is a set amount of days from the time that you close that the buyer has to occupy the property. So sometimes there's gonna be a buyer that says, hey, I wanna rent back. Or I don't think it's called rent back, but there's, what is the term? Because you gotta be careful about,
Post occupancy agreement.
yeah, so it's not rent because then they have the rights as a tenant. You don't want to give the holdover person rights as a tenant. You just want to allow them to stay there longer. So if your buyer is an owner occupant and they have either a rental agreement or a holdover, you want to make sure that they vacate within the amount of days, typically no more than 60. I hear more like 55 days after closing, for the lender to be able to not rescind the loan from the buyer. Okay, so you want to make sure about that. If it's a investor buyer, make sure that the investor buyer sees all the agreements with the tenant, because they are taking that on. That doesn't change, right? So the property condition form, the rental property agreement, all of that stuff. And if the buyer doesn't have a property manager and is open to it, then I would get that property manager engaged early in the process so that they will help walk through, look at the documents, walk through the property prior to close, and make sure that that property manager can take it on. Anything else?
Well, even if your client is an investor, you want to make sure that the outgoing property manager, if they're not going to keep them on, does a walkthrough with a new property manager with the tenant being there so they can verify that the condition of the property that it is now was how it was when they moved in. Because otherwise, if there's no documentation, no photos, then the tenant can say that, you know, the property was in, you know, much better condition or worse condition than it was when they moved in. So that becomes a problem for the new owner when the buyer comes, you know, time to check the new buyer out. I mean, the tenant out if you're the new owner. Also, if it's a property that's a short-term vacation rental that's legal, you kind of want to have some added verbiage in there that they're either going to keep reservations for so many days or you want to cancel reservations after so many days because you don't want to be obligated for reservations that are made 2 years down the road. So you want to get an entire list of all the vacation rentals that are on the books. And then most of the times you want to also get a copy of their agreement that they have to see what the cancellation is, you know, with the incoming guest. Make sure that you can go ahead and cancel.
Cool. Did I read N3 already? N3, so rental agreement changes during the escrow period. During the escrow period, seller shall not, without prior written consent of buyer, make any changes to the documents described in N2 or enter into any new rental agreements or vacation rental reservations which extend beyond the scheduled closing date. Okay, any questions on rental property matters? No? Okay, Sunshine, back to you.
Section O, termination, mediation, arbitration, and other matters. A1, termination due to default. This paragraph shall not apply to a particular obligation or contingency if paragraphs O2 or O3 have been specifically designated as a termination provision. In the event that the buyer is in default for failure to perform buyer's obligations under this purchase contract, seller not being in default, seller may terminate this purchase contract and A, bring an action for damages for breach of contract, or B, retain the initial earnest money deposit and all additional deposits provided for in this purchase contract. However, if the buyer has performed the obligation prior to seller delivering written notice terminating this purchase contract, then this termination provision shall not apply to such obligation.
Okay, why don't you stop there? We can talk about that piece. So O1 is default, right? So if buyer is in default, so default, it's all on the financing side typically, right? So is additional deposit still O1? Yeah, it is O1. So if you look at like C2 as an example, on the very bottom of C2, should buyer fail to make initial money deposit, earnest money deposit, or additional deposit when due, seller may elect to terminate pursuant to O1. And O1 says if they're in default, which is what happens if they don't put in their additional deposit on time, seller can cancel and retain initial and additional deposits. So as a buyer's agent, just be very careful about the dates.
Wait, they can't retain deposits anymore. Says that?
Yep. Or retain the initial earnest money deposit and all additional deposits. That's why I was confused. I thought you guys said they can't, but it says it right there.
Okay.
One of our previous meetings, it was stated that you can't retain the deposits anymore. I said, really? But as I'm reading it, it's still there.
The seller can take the deposit
Yeah.
and the earnest money if the buyer
Yeah.
is not.
Yeah, sue for breach or retain.
Yeah,
But that
Okay.
was saying. like,
That was
you
always
can't
there.
Do it anymore in.
Oh, no. The statement was made that this changed. So they took that out.
But they didn't.
They didn't. It's still there.
What would be the repercussion then?
There wouldn't
Just
be.
say-
That's what. Yeah, it would be that all you can do is sue them. If they took out,
Then a deposit,
well, what's the point, right?
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So,
well, the original purchase, I mean, one of the previous editions said it right in C2 was that if the buyer failed to make payment, it was automatic default and that the seller could retain the deposits. there wasn't even option for the breach, right? For the initial deposits. The breach came in as if they were in default of a different provision. Then you can kind of go and sue for a specific performance, but with regards to the initial deposits, it was kind of like an automatic thing that they belong to the seller. So the verbiage changed a little bit, but I think they give the
It's still
seller
there.
two options, one to retain the deposits, two to go ahead and sue.
And so when I explain this to sellers, right, they think it's an automatic thing that if the deposits are missed, escrow will immediately just release the deposits back to seller. Escrow will wait for a buyer to acknowledge and accept and send it over. And if they don't agree to send it over, and correct me if I'm wrong, escrow will not send it over.
No,
So it's never, it'll just
goes
sit
in
there.
limbo.
It goes into limbo. And so that's why it's never as clean as you think. Because I thought it's a clean thing. If buyer doesn't deposit additional, they're in breach, I'm gonna keep the deposit. So escrow, give me the money. Escrow's like, nope, I need authorization from buyer to release the money. Because they may be saying to escrow, no, we weren't, because of this, that's why we did that. So no, we need to mediate this thing. So don't release the money.
That's why like if you're representing a seller and you get a contract in, and I know there's a lot of VA buyers that don't have a lot of money, but it's usually only like $1,000. Like if the buyer doesn't make the additional deposit of whatever is negotiated and he walks, it's $1,000. And so the seller's basically tied up his property for a good amount of time, for just $1,000. So it's, you gotta be careful. Make sure the buyer's solid, make sure he's gonna go through with it. Otherwise, the seller's at risk of taking the property off the market, and especially today. I mean, the market has picked up a little bit, but we're not getting that many multiple offers anymore. So, if come in a down market, if the seller's has to come back on the market, more than likely, they're not gonna be able to get the amount of money that they had when they first went into escrow. So always try and counter with a higher deposit if you're representing the seller.
Yeah, and so buyer can cause a lot of problems to seller by saying, well, I'm not gonna cancel, leave it open. If it's left open in escrow, you cannot open another escrow with the same escrow company. So if you're opening with TG and you say, well, I know this guy isn't gonna buy, and while we're working through this issue, I'm going back on the market and I want to find another buyer and open escrow. Well, you cannot open two escrows for the same property at TG. You can open another escrow with another company, but it has to be resolved before you close, would be my thinking. So just know that when that happens, it's not as clean as you might think or want it to be.
But if the buyer doesn't pay, it's not the buyer that's canceling, it's the seller that's canceling.
Sellers canceling on buyer because of default, right? And buyer's like, well, whatever, but I'm not gonna give you the money, and I'm not gonna cancel escrow. I'm gonna dispute this. I'm just saying, right? That's what a buyer could do. Sure, why not?
Doesn't matter.
Why not?
It's like you get two attorneys, they're gonna argue it. And at
Yeah.
the same, if you're representing a buyer, because I see a lot of contracts come in, for like a $500,000 purchase, and the buyer will put up, the agent will write in initial deposit $50,000. And I'm like, well, why do you want to do that? Oh, because it'll make us stronger. And I said, okay, if there's an issue where your buyer has $50,000 tied up and the seller decides that your buyer's in breach, can your buyer afford to either lose his deposit or to have it held up for an indefinite amount of time and have to get an attorney and bring it back? So be within reason, with the initial and the additional deposits.
What would you say?
I'm sorry?
What would you say would be a good?
If it's like a $500,000, property, I would do like 5,000 or 5,000. That's what I would offer, it could get countered.
It's like what, 1% to
Yeah, usually like
1 to
1%,
2% or something like that.
2%.
So if there is a breach and the seller decides to cancel on the buyer, they can still sell the property even though that there's this other.
Well, if you're,
in with
It-
another escrow.
if you're suing, if you cancel, right? Um. If you're suing for breach, you can't cancel, you can cancel, or you have to just sue for breach. Like you can't cancel, once you cancel, then the contract is basically dead.
Well,
So and there is no
but
agreement.
both parties have to agree to cancel.
To release.
If
the
I'm
funds.
seller and I say cancel due to 01,
Right, but if you want to retain the deposits, you're not canceling. You're canceling and retain deposits. So basically you're keeping the escrow open, right? But if you've got a backup offer and you don't want the deposits because you want to move forward with offer number B, you're just canceling and give back the buyer their deposits.
But what if the buyer doesn't want to release?
yeah, what if they don't want to cancel?
It's too late already. Buyer's in breach. He's getting his deposit back. It says it right here.
What
What's,
if he feels he's not in breach? He goes to argue that can you still sell your property to someone else?
I would-
While this money is still in escrow.
I think
while
we
this
should
buyer's
read
trying to fight.
the next, I think we should finish reading on one.
Yeah.
I think might
Does it
answer
answer it?
well, it just says, talking about buyer not being in default.
In the
It's
event
a-
seller's in default,
It's the seller's in
Yeah.
default.
It says if the seller has performed the obligation prior to the buyer delivering written notice. Buyer delivering written notice terminating the purchase contract, then this termination provision shall not apply to such obligation.
Right.
Yep, so if buyer, so let's say that seller didn't realize, or seller's agent didn't realize that they accepted, or they put in the deposit and says, oh, we're gonna cancel on you guys because we can get the additional deposit. But it was already done. Then what it says is that,
It says seller may terminate purchase contract. Like that's the answer, right? Like they can cancel it.
yeah, we're saying, yeah, I mean, when you read it, all I'm saying is it may not be that black and white. Because escrow is involved. And so I say, you didn't submit your additional deposit. I'm gonna keep your $5,000 initial deposit. I tell escrow, buyers in default didn't put in their additional deposit that was due last week, Friday. I'm canceling because you haven't said anything. I'm canceling. Give me the 5,000. Then escrow goes to your agent and says, can we release the 5,000? And your agent says, heck no. Then what? Escrow's not gonna give me the money.
But check with escrow, because every escrow company, they have a policy now because they don't want to. They don't want to retain funds for an indefinite period of time, so they do have a cancellation provision, within their policies.
You're right.
And
You're
they'll
right.
say like, okay, well, we'll retain deposits
Well,
for 21 days
yeah,
or
we-
14 days.
Yeah.
And if there's no agreement, we're just gonna release it.
Okay, why don't you finish the 01?
Okay, in the event seller is in default or failure to perform seller's obligations under this purchase contract, buyer not being in default. Buyer may A, terminate this purchase contract and bring an action for damages for breach of contract. Or B, seek specific performance of this purchase contract. However, if the seller has performed the obligation prior to buyer delivering written notice terminating this purchase contract, then this termination provision shall not apply to such obligation. The foregoing shall not exclude any other remedies available under the law, either seller or buyer, due to the other party's default.
So that's where seller didn't perform. Maybe they didn't give this SRPDS, or they didn't give them a title report or whatever it may be, then buyer can cancel or seek damages, I guess, right? Performance damages.
And there's 3 different termination provisions, 01, 02, 03. And they're scattered throughout the purchase contract.
Mhm.
So what I highly recommend is going through each provision and finding out if it's, can I cancel on 01? Can I cancel on 02? Or can I cancel on 03? And then some of the provisions having to do mostly like with financing, it's
Per buyer.
it's, I can do 02 on this, on H2A, but 03 on H2 3. You know, whatever it is, I'm just kind of taking off the top of my head. So you just have to really, you know which ones you're able to cancel on or what your timeframes are.
I have a question about delivering written notice. So in any situation, not only this, say the buyer's agent sends an email to the seller's agent, is that considered delivery?
Yep.
So what if the person receiving the email states, oh, I didn't open it?
That's why-
Doesn't
that's-
As long as they can prove
That's what,
delivery.
that's why you put in the subject line.
Yeah.
Written notification to cancel.
Okay.
And that's why it's always good when you're crafting emails. You don't do cancellation on setting up J1 inspection. Like, always do a new subject line if it's pertaining to a new subject. Now, if you've got 10 emails going back and forth, called to do a J1, then by all means, keep the same subject line. But if you're gonna be sending written notice into cancellation, then you send it to escrow, you sell it to the seller's agent or the buyer's agent and whoever else that you need to, and CC yourself on it.
Right.
So
Okay.
we have more than one office. KW, Honolulu office. We have, we do. we still-
Kapolei and Kailua.
Okay, so let's say that I am the seller's agent for locations. And I'm gonna deliver SRPDS, and what you normally get is emails, right? Oh, Sunshine, here's SRPDS for 123 Main Street. But in this case, I'm with locations, I take the seller's disclosure, and I live in Kapolei. I drive to the Kapolei office and I hand it to the receptionist. Is that proper delivery of SRPDS? And you're out of this office. What do you guys think?
What if I mail it? What if I mail you written
No,
notice?
so I drop it off and you say, you hope not.
I think it is.
You think it is? Okay, so let's go back to A. What's the relationship? It's brokerage, right? You're an agent of the brokerage. So if I deliver to the brokerage, I fulfilled that obligation. So even though it's for Sunshine out of Honolulu Kapilani office, by delivering to Kapolei to KW Honolulu Kapolei, it starts the clock.
It's the same as deposit to escrow. You can go to any escrow.
Yeah, just get proof of that, right?
Yeah, you need the receipt, but I can.
Yep.
Go to escrow in Kapolei, even if the company is Kahana.
Yeah.
Are you talking about like delivering written notice?
No.
Deposit.
Oh, deposit, yeah. Yeah, always ask for receipt. And normally they'll scan it and email it directly over, and the good escrow companies will just say, hey, initial deposit received, additional deposit received. But going back as far as delivering, it doesn't, if you look at 01, let me see. Like the 6th line, all it says is prior to seller delivering written notice. It doesn't say anything about buyer receiving it. Seller delivered it.
Yeah.
I can deliver an envelope to the post office and mail it. It's delivered according to Chemo Stone.
So explain that. If I mail it and I show that I mailed it on the 1st,
That's,
that's the when it starts?
I delivered written notice. Yeah.
Holy moly.
Yeah, it doesn't say anything about receiving, it's delivery.
Even though the post office could take 5 days.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's why I said holy moly.
Did you do certified or how did you prove you was?
No, I'm not saying I've done that, right? Yeah. Well, you know what, like if you want to do that, then go to the post office, mail it without a stamp, and they'll give you a receipt on the date and the time that it was delivered, and make a copy.
You know, a lot of times these issues with dates come up because both parties have a different date in mind. So strongly recommend that like on opening escrow. So the RTC sends it out saying, this is when we're opening escrow. You guys agree? So that, and every date is going to be based on this opening escrow date. It's when that date is nebulous that people run into problems. Because all of a sudden, if I think it opens on the 1st and they think it opens on the 2nd, what happens to J1? We all are looking at different dates for expiration. Yeah. So same thing with that. If I receive a mailed copy of something, I would email saying, hey, I just got it. So I have X amount of days, right? Or something that documents.
That's why for me,
we
I
have the
always,
same dates.
that's for me, I always put closing will be 45 days after the date of acceptance, meaning that the date of acceptance is not day number 1, it's the next day. Date of acceptance is just that, it's the date of acceptance. I've accepted, it's not my first day of J1.
I pulled up a cancellation from First American Title.
Yeah, 2 days.
Actually, yeah. Very sad. The party of this escrow has directed escrow holder to prepare these cancellation instructions. If escrow does not receive written notice of any objections within 10 days after mailing of this form, escrow may proceed.
Yeah.
So if somebody objects within 10
Yeah.
days, they can't proceed.
So they are asking, right? It's not an automatic thing like you would think it would be based on what you read. Escrow is asking the other side, I received notice of cancellation, confirm, or tell me otherwise.
At its option with the cancellation of this escrow account and disperse funds as indicated below.
Yep. See, so it's not automatic. They require both parties to agree.
You are instructed to cancel this escrow upon execution of these instructions or within 10 days after mailing if there is no written objection.
Yep. Yep.
Escrow the holder is relieved of any further responsibility.
And then call the escrow company and says, what happens if the buyer or the seller doesn't agree to cancel? Say, what do you do then?
Yeah.
You just hold it open forever, because I know that most companies will just
That's why I thought it was.
cancel the file out at some point in time.
Yeah, my whole thing with that was just can the seller proceed with another sale while this is going on?
They can, but the risk is if this goes
Like, you can proceed, but I would write in the contract,
Subject
subject
to-
to the final cancellation from both parties in on the current escrow.
so in that case, it's almost like a backup,
Yeah,
right?
Why would a buyer agree to that subject like that? Then they're just also in limbo.
yeah, I'll tell you, I'm gonna tell you a little story, and then we can call it quits for today, but
Really?
it was a, because it's
Oh, it's 1:30
1:30
already.
Yeah,
I'm having so much fun.
okay, so, there was another broker had the listing, okay? Both buyers were represented by agents within KW. Neither one of them knew. Buyer A, I forgot,
Wait, neither, who didn't know?
okay, you represent buyer A,
Okay,
I represent buyer B.
And locations have a listing.
Locations has the
Oh, okay,
listing.
okay, I got you.
You're already in escrow, but you don't do something that you're supposed to be doing. Okay, and so
then they go to the next guy who's
So-
also KW.
but you're also in escrow, okay? You're also in escrow. So I call the listing agent and I say, hey, I've got a cash buyer for your property, $200,000 over asking. And so they say, bring it in. Now, it wasn't locations, but I'm gonna say locations. So locations sends you notice.
Okay.
That you're in default. And I forgot what the provision was, and they said we're canceling.
Okay.
Now, I delivered the offer to locations. Locations accepts it. Now, so now locations realizes.
Two accepted offers from
You got,
KW.
you got 2 accepted offers. Doesn't even matter that they're both KW.
Okay.
And I happen to know because I'm the broker, and so now they're calling me.
Okay.
Because buyer B kind of told me the situation, and I said, deliver it. The broker for locations was the one that told the seller to accept it without even getting cancellation from escrow.
Oh, but they had delivered the cancellation.
Yeah.
This happened after hours.
But they delivered a written notice that you're in default or canceling.
The
Yeah.
default was kind of iffy. But the locations or the outside broker's like, hey, it's $200,000. We'll worry about it later. And this was like, and the broker on the other side was the principal broker of the company. And so what ends up happening is that now the buyer B is hopping on a plane. And the agent says, hey, they're withdrawing they had accepted buyer B's offer. Buyer's getting on a plane to come out here that day, and then the outside broker goes, oh, they're rescinding their acceptance. And so the buyer is like a really rich person. He goes, F that, I'm coming out. I'll sue whoever I need to sue. I'm getting that property. Long story short, the seller had to buy out buyer number A
Oh, my goodness.
for just about the amount or more than the amount than they were getting from buyer B.
Price, not for like what was in.
The 200,000,
That's.
the over. Yeah. And a lot
And
of
so,
headaches.
and so I knew everything that was going on. The two agents didn't know anything. They didn't even know that it was the same company. And I knew the attorneys on both sides. And so I lost all respect for the PB.
But that's what I was told, yeah.
The seller have gone ahead and accepted the second offer as a backup offer.
But they didn't do that. They didn't do
But
that.
they could have.
They could
Could
have.
I have them sort of on the warm plate and tell them to just hold on there for a day or two or whatever?
They could have done that with a backup offer addendum, but they didn't do that. They just went ahead and accepted and then rescinded the acceptance. Because they knew they were in hot water. And I knew the attorneys that represented both, like I had worked with both attorneys that were representing the buyer B, buyer A, and the brokerage company on the other side. And I was like, the brokerage company, I said, man, I said, your guys have some liability, you know? And so they didn't take the hit. They convinced the seller to eat.
So let me
It
ask
was
you
like,
this.
it was like almost close to 200,000.
Let me ask you this. So my offer is in, you submit your offer, but instead of it being 200,000 more, it was 5,000 more. Do you think locations would have done the same thing?
Probably not.
It's all about the money, folks. It's all about the money.
Did
It clouds your judgment.
buyer A have like a good point, like why they weren't, like the default was kind of, like, if they defaulted, wouldn't the seller have had more leverage?
Yeah, so,
in the contract?
well, so I'm gonna tell you what they canceled on. Okay?
You said it was iffy, right?
It was really iffy. Let me see.
It was so iffy, you don't even remember.
Nope, I'm gonna tell you. Take a look at paragraph H1. And H1A. H1A was checked off and it said like 5 days. So what happened was that the buyer's financing was changing. And they had already submitted a pre-approval letter for X amount financing. And then the financing got changed. So unbeknownst to the agent, the transaction coordinator sends in a new verification of funds or pre-qualification letter with the new loan amounts. And so the seller said, well, I don't approve your verification of funds and I don't like your new loan amounts and therefore I'm canceling. So that's why I always tell people, get NA. Do not do, like, you can get verification of funds, but do not let the seller have an option to cancel that. Put 0 days.
Oh, so this happened way up front then, right after
It
acceptance of the original
Oh,
offer.
no, these guys were in escrow for like 2 weeks.
But then it says that you have to, so that must have been a really long time frame then.
No,
H1A,
Okay, H1A, you send me verification of funds.
yes,
Your buyer decides that he's gonna get different financing.
yeah,
So he gets a new verification letter, right?
Yeah.
Which means technically he should resubmit,
Like he changed to cash.
like he changed the cash or
Hmm.
or not even cash, but a different loan amount, okay? Now, as an agent, I would just not submit any new verification, right?
Yep.
But the TM, without the buyer's agent knowing, submitted a new letter. And so that's what they were using.
so let's say,
And I think it was more cash down. I think like it was like so ridiculous for the reason why they canceled.
yeah.
Right?
Yep.
But that was on the advice of the PB that said, yeah, you're within your right to go ahead and cancel.
Because you're not satisfied with the verification.
Yep, well, it's $200,000.
Yeah, but
It
the
clouds your
seller
judgment.
ate it. Seller got nothing.
Yeah, no,
The
at the
seller
end of
got
the
nothing,
day,
you
but
know, and the seller was an older couple, like, I don't want to be in litigation, so I'm just going to eat the cost.
They didn't sue the location to pull them.
I don't know. And it wasn't locations, by the way, but it was another big brokerage company. So, yeah,
Codo banker.
Yeah. Giving bad advice.
well, he should be, but you know, if they went after him, I wouldn't be privy unless I looked at court documents.
We can look it up.
Yeah,
So
so,
we stopped in a kind of unique spot between 01, 02, and 03.
yeah. So do yourself a favor, go back and take a look at the contract and go through it and just, you know, and different color highlights. You know, 01 is this color, 02, and then and there's markers right there if you need any. And just see how many different ways there are to cancel.
01 is bad, just remember that. 01 is bad.
And it doesn't show up that often.
Yeah. All right,
You have
any
a question?
final questions?
What's your question?
The, first, the H1A, where do you put zero?
Suggestions within 5 days.
Yeah. Okay, well, based on the scenario, you can go ahead and put 5 days if you want, but I'm telling you, just it's 0 days or NA.
As long as you include that with your offer though.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, because you still want to satisfy that to seller. So you don't want to skip providing the documentation. You just don't want seller to be able to cancel on you later if they change their mind, because that's a opening for them to be able to do that.
Put NA match to H1 or just H1A?
Well,
No,
you still have to kind of give them some sort of a verification.
Yeah,
So what I would do is I would do verification.
yeah, so you have to check H1 if you're gonna, if you're gonna bring, if you have no contingency.
Yeah, so you would do verification of cash funds and you would attach it and you would put 0 days.
Yeah.
Because it's saying if buyer fails to give such evidence within the time frame, oh, sorry. You can put 1 day in there. Okay, so you check A,
Mhm.
you can do 1 day. And then it says if seller is not satisfied with such evidence, seller may elect within 0 days. Or NA, either one. Don't give him the option to cancel.
You told us at the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just remembering the whole, yeah. Cause I got the call from the agent like 11 o'clock at night. She says, what do I do? My buyer, I said, have him come over. He's got a lot of cash. He can sue. Cause I was like, yeah, stick it to the broker on the other side. I was like, do it, do it to him. So next week, after class, I would like everybody to stay for maybe like 20 minutes, maybe break into like 2 groups. And I want both groups to complete a purchase contract and give it to me because I want to use it for the next class that we teach. And we're gonna
Teaching again?
well, I don't know about you, but I'm looking at another class where I'll probably do a counter offer to it. And it's basically gonna be like run a couple of different scenarios. And you're gonna be the agent as groups. And I'm gonna say like, okay, well, I represent the buyer and therefore I'm not submitting this.
I like that. It's a
So
good
what do you do?
exercise.
Like, what do you do? When do you do it? You know, like J1, hey, the buyer hasn't submitted the J1. What do you want me to do, Mr. Seller? You have to respond by 11:59 PM tonight, you know, like what, do you just send them the email? Like, do you cancel the J based on J1? If the, what happens if the seller doesn't get back to you? You know, things
A
like
lot,
that.
lot of tricks, yeah, that you can
Yeah.
put in there, so. Oh, and then I think you're gonna have the, not all of them, but the key addendums.
Yeah.
printed For next week.
Yeah.
That we can, whatever time we have, can go through, or if, or what you guys can also do, because I have a feeling we may not have that much time. Go through them and bring your questions in case we can't go through each one of them.